So by the end of this training month, you've actually done the same number of intensity days for the whole month. You just blocked it all together in the first week as opposed to spreading it out. And there is research to show that blocking it together in the first week actually led to greater fitness gains than spreading it out more evenly. It's like become like road racing now. Road racing is very tactical, and you got to play these games with yourself. You know, what's a good move to follow, what's not a good move to follow. Unbound has become that in the pro race.
Welcome to the TrainingPeaks Coachcast. I'm your host, Dirk Friel. In each episode, we'll sit down with industry experts to discuss coaching methodologies, the latest research, and leading tools for endurance training. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources. My guest today is Dylan Johnson, who is a coach for Ignition Coaching. Dylan is also well known for being a professional gravel racer, where he has been competing on the Lifetime Grand Prix Series. On this episode, we talk all things gravel from the perspective of both the professional and amateur. We talk a lot about gravel equipment, from tires to the amount of fluids you can carry on your bike. We also chat about pacing for gravel races and specific training to help you get faster in long races. Hope you can learn a thing or two to help you get faster on the dirt. Dylan Johnson, thanks for joining me today on the TrainingPeaks podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You know, I was out at Unbound and I should have seen you out there, and a lot of folks know what has happened to you and why you were not on the start line. But for those that don't know, give us a little insight into why you weren't at Unbound last week.
Yeah, it was a pretty big bummer because Unbound, just like any serious gravel racer nowadays, Unbound is kind of Super Bowl of gravel, and for me, it's the biggest race of my season. And unfortunately, less than 2 weeks out from the race, I got hit by a truck while I was training, and it could have been a lot worse. I guess I'm lucky that it wasn't worse than it was, but I've got a fractured tibia and fibula, so I'm off the bike for a little bit here, and of course that meant that I couldn't go to Unbound either.
Yeah, unfortunately, that happens far too often. But I think because you're not racing, maybe we'll get a different responses from you. You know, you're a little bit of a neutral party on the outside this time watching. I think the point of today is to kind of like all things gravel. You know, there's a lot of listeners, a lot of triathletes, a lot of runners, even cyclists that are like, what's this gravel thing still, you know, and they're dabbling in it and they want to do more of it. But I think also those that do race gravel, there's going to be some really cool insights that we can gather from you today. So I would love to attack kind of each of these kind of big topics in two different angles. One from the angle of a pro yourself and how you think about equipment, tires, nutrition, et cetera. But then how you translate that for your amateurs that you're coaching, the age groupers. You know, how do they dig into these different topics and make the most of their, you know, gravel race and training. So with that, I'd love to rehash a little bit more on Unbound. What kind of trends did you see this year? You know, things have been moving quickly in gravel, and what are the kind of new things that you've seen this year on the scene, especially at Unbound?
Sure. Yeah. So on the equipment side, I think tires is a trend that we continue to see. At the beginning of last year, I was one of the only riders riding mountain bike tires for gravel. And by the time, this is how quickly this trend evolved. By the time we got to, this is the beginning of 2024. By the time we got to the end of 2024, Big Sugar, which is the final big US gravel race of the season, I mean, it seemed like nearly every pro rider that could fit mountain bike tires on their bike had mountain bike tires on for Big Sugar. So that's definitely been a trend. I looked at the bikes at Unbound this year. There were a lot more mountain bike tires than last year, which is to be expected. There weren't a lot of mountain bike tires in general last year because Unbound's relatively early in the season. And as I said, this is kind of a trend that progressed towards the latter part of the season last year. But saw a lot of mountain bike tires out there, and not just on pro bikes. Amateurs posting pictures of their bikes with mountain bike tires.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of
So,
across the
so,
board.
so for those that don't know, what about the diameter,
Mhm.
the width of what used to be versus now?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's been getting wider for a while. When I first started racing gravel back in 2018, I did my first Unbound on 38s, and
Yeah.
38s was pretty common. I mean, 38s, 40s, that was typical gravel tire width. And now a lot of people do it on 45s, see a lot of 50s out there. But when I'm talking about mountain bike tires, I'm talking about 2.1s, which would be 51, 52 millimeters, or 2.2s, which would be 55 millimeters.
Yeah.
If we look at what I ran last year at Unbound versus what I ran the first year, we're talking about 38 millimeter tires versus 55 millimeter tires. It's a substantial difference in just, I guess, a 6 year period.
Yeah. And is that, I mean, talk to us about the speed versus, risk of flatting. Like
Mm-hmm.
why go fatter?
Yeah, so there's a number of reasons. My main reason for doing it is actually because I personally believe that mountain bike tires are actually faster on gravel than gravel tires. Now that's a pretty blanket statement, and there are it depends on which mountain bike tire you're talking about. It depends on which gravel tires you're talking about, because casing matters a lot. But the reason why I say this is because, interestingly enough, mountain bike tires actually generally have a thinner casing than
Yeah.
the equivalent gravel tire, which might be counterintuitive. But the reason why a fatter mountain bike tire can get away with a thinner casing is because the volume of the tire is so much higher. So they can get away with a thinner casing without increasing the puncture risk. And then I think there might be an argument to be made that the tread of the tire is also protecting the tire from flats as well. And
Yeah.
so generally when you have a tire with a thinner casing, that means it's got a lower rolling resistance. Not always, because the compound of the tire matters, but generally thinner casing means lower rolling resistance. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, I don't say that I believe that mountain bike tires are faster on gravel because I have a hunch about this. I'm saying this based off of data that I've collected myself from real world testing that I've done. And then I've also tested at Silverstone on their pedaling efficiency rig, found the exact same thing. Other riders are finding the exact same thing. Both amateurs and pros are testing this for themselves. They're coming to this same conclusion. So this is very counterintuitive, because it seems like a wide knobby mountain bike tire should be slower.
Yeah.
But and again, I don't want to say across the board mountain bike tire would be faster than a gravel tire, because there's slow mountain bike tires out there, there's fast gravel tires out there. But this is just a general trend that we're seeing.
So on the circuit, what course, would where do you always ride the widest always, or are there courses where you do go to a 45?
Yeah, it really depends on the roughness of the gravel and the amount of road in the course. So courses
Right.
like a lot of the BWR courses, but especially the BWR California course,
Mm.
could be 70+% road. So a mountain bike tire is still slower on the road, it seems, at least from some of the testing I've done and some of the testing other people have done. So when you get into a course that's got a lot of pavement, you kind of have to do these calculations, like, or
Right.
how much of my race time is going to be spent on pavement, how much of my race time is going to be spent on gravel. Are there critical sections on pavement, or are there critical sections on gravel where I want to optimize for? These are all things that you have to think about. I think that for races like Unbound, it's a pretty obvious choice, because I want to say Unbound is 3% pavement,
Right. Yeah.
so
And
it's
very,
not a
very,
lot.
you're going over like chunky rock. We don't even
Yeah.
have that rock in Colorado.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So, course records were set this year
Mm-hmm.
in the male and female. Why do you think? I mean, by vast amounts. I mean, this is the first time under 9 hours, right? For
Mm-hmm.
the men,
Mm-hmm.
Cameron and Jones. Um, I think he did 8:37.
Mm-hmm.
So, why do you think there was such a huge drop off in terms of or the increase in the speeds.
Yeah, yeah. No, I noticed that immediately as I was watching it. I just the speeds were incredible. So I think it's a number of things. I think equipment is improving at a rapid rate, and it's making these times come down at a rapid rate. Just to give you an example, I go back to 2018, which is 7 years ago at this point. 7 years ago is not that long ago.
Yeah.
And I was on 38s, but I was not the only rider on 38s. Like that was a pretty standard tire size pick for Unbound. And now most of the riders are on 45s, 50s, and then mountain bike tires, 2.1s and 2.2s. And I think it makes a huge difference. If we're talking about the difference between 2.2 mountain bike tires at the correct pressure over the course of Unbound versus 38s at, I don't know what I ran them at, 40 PSI or something, way too high. Yeah. That's tens of watts of difference. It's substantial. It's not even a marginal gain, in my opinion. It's just a gain. It's a substantial difference. I think the aerodynamics makes a huge difference too. Gravel riders are really thinking about their aerodynamics, whereas 7 years ago they were not thinking about that, or at least not nearly to the same degree that they are now.
So, what are the big equipment changes when you consider aerodynamics? What has changed in 7 years?
Well, I mean, I think gravel riders are just following suit. They're following what road riders are doing. Road riders are on, they're on the edge of the latest aero trends always, because arguably aerodynamics matters the most in road racing. But gravel riders are now not that far behind. So we see aero helmets, we see skin suits, we see aero socks, we see deep wheels, we see integrated cockpits, all of that. And we see riders considering their position more than they used to. So all of these things, again, that's another thing where it's like tens of watts of difference when you add all of that together.
Yeah. Well, we are relating everything back to Unbound, but I think it relates to any other gravel race as well. I think about you. It's always the topic of the week is muddy or dry. What's the weather going to be, right? Mm-hmm. And I see the pros showing up with, two sets of wheels basically, right? Mm-hmm. So what would you change if it were a muddy year versus a dry year?
Yeah. So if it's a muddy year, the mud at Unbound is, I mean, they call it peanut butter. I think that cement is a better word to use to describe it. The reason I say cement is because it seems like it cakes up on your bike and then it dries really quickly and it's extremely hard to get off.
Right.
So really, if it's muddy, the most important thing becomes tire clearance. And it really depends on how much tire clearance your frame has to what tire you're going to run, because you are going to want a pretty substantial gap between your tire and your frame if it's muddy. Personally, if it was a really muddy year, I probably would have run maybe 40s.
Wow.
Whereas if it's a dry year, I'm doing 2.2 mountain bike tires. So substantial difference there.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And then you have the paint, with the paint like scraper, to get the mud off. Do you take anything like that to like scrape mud off?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll have a paint stick in my jersey pocket. I think anybody who did Unbound in, what was it? 2023?
Yeah.
2023 was the bad mud year. I mean, you learn quickly how bad Unbound can get. And that was only a short section. It was a 5-mile section, but it absolutely defined the race. And all it takes, it could be a mostly dry course, and all it takes is a 5-mile section to completely blow things apart. A lot of mechanicals, losing groups, having to deal with mud on your bike, I had mud caked up on my bike, and I probably lost nearly 40 minutes in that one section. So yeah, it matters.
Well, I did the 100. I only did the 100 this year, and I was so thankful it was dry. So it'd be a totally different experience when it's wet. Another thing with equipment is we're starting to see some suspension forks. Is that inevitable that we're all gonna have to buy new frames and forks,
Mhm.
5 years from now?
I could see suspension forks making some headway in gravel. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that, so right now in gravel, you need some form of suspension. And for the vast majority of gravel bikes, the suspension is solely coming from the tires. The
Mm-hmm.
tires are acting as the suspension. And that's actually why you need such large tires for gravel right now. That's why you need a 2.2 mountain bike tire. It's because the tire is acting as the sole
Right.
suspension for the whole bike. And I think that if you have another form of suspension, whether it be a suspension fork or trying to do some sort of full suspension gravel bike, then you don't have to rely quite as much on your tires to act as the suspension, and you could potentially go back to smaller tires, and
Mm-hmm.
and you that could be the best of both worlds if you have a course that is a mix of both pavement and gravel. You could lock out the suspension on the pavement and have a little bit more of a efficient setup on the pavement with smaller tires, and then you get on the gravel, you open up your suspension, and you've got an equally efficient setup for the gravel sections.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I saw I don't know, some paper or something recently where it showed like if you had the front suspension, then a narrower tire was overall faster because you have to separate suspension from rolling resistance. It's
Mm-hmm.
not all one
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? So if you can actually get suspension outside of the tire in some other form, then you can then you start thinking about different tires, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So I just upgraded my bike because my last bike couldn't hold a 50. The
Mm-hmm.
max I could do was a 45. So hence I just bought a new bike like 10 days ago. And first outing on it was Unbound. So now I can do fatter tires, but who knows? Maybe 5 years from now is the next time to upgrade with suspension coming out. So never ending. If you're an equipment geek, this is the time to be in gravel for sure. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so more about equipment. What do you extras that you carry with you? The CO2s, the tubes, how many plugs, pump, do you take a pump, like all
Mm-hmm.
that type of stuff for all the flatting?
Yeah, well, this might be a I don't know if this is actually going to be advice, but I'll tell you what I do.
Yeah.
I will almost never carry a tube with me during a race. I don't
Mm.
even carry a tube with me for Unbound.
Wow.
In my in my view, if you have gotten to the point where you have to put, and again, you said let's talk about this from the pro perspective, and let's talk about this from the amateur perspective. This is not advice that I'm giving to actually anyone, to be honest with you. I'm just telling you what I do
Yeah.
personally. But
Great.
I don't personally carry a tube, because if I'm at the point where I have to put a tube in my bike, the race is probably over for me. And I don't mean over like I'm not going to finish. I will try to finish, but as far as getting a result, it's probably over. And the reason I say that is not because it takes a long time to put a tube in, but if you're to the point where you're putting a tube in, that means multiple plugs have failed. You're probably trying to put a gel wrapper in there. You're you're figuring things that it's done
It's a
for.
last case.
Yeah, it's a worst case scenario, and at that point, you're kind of just trying to limp home to the finish line. On top of that, if you do have a tube in a gravel bike at a race like Unbound, you're probably going to get another flat, um, just because
Yeah.
uh, tubes are flat prone on sharp gravel. What I do is I carry Dynaplugs with me, and I've got one of the Dynaplugs that has 4 plugs in it, so I
Mm-hmm.
could fill 4 holes. So if I'm getting more than 4 flats, again, I guess it's just a bad day for me. And then I carry a CO2 with me. So I have had to fix flats, and the Dynaplug always it fixes every hole that I've had. Knock on
Yeah.
wood, up until this point. And in my entire career of racing gravel, I have never had a flat so bad that I needed a tube.
So how about age groupers?
You should probably carry a tube. Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I had one of the Tufo, or one of the thin orange ones, 2 CO2s
Mm-hmm.
and the Dynaplugs. and I bought those race week.
Yeah.
So I don't have a lot of experience doing that. So I think, having those mishaps and having those experiences help you dramatically. Like
Mhm.
if you've never done it before it happens on race day, you might need an extra hand, like someone to show you the ropes, so try and figure that out before race day to get figure out how to, plug a tire, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would, if it's important enough to you, I would nearly find an old tire that you're not going to use again and just puncture it with a nail and then see if
Yeah.
you can plug it with the plug or not,
Yeah.
just to practice. Because if you are plugging a tire for the first time in your life on race day, chances that you screw it up are obviously higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about nutrition? I want to kind of start with breakfast. What are
Mhm.
your tips? What do you do? How far ahead? What are you aiming for?
Mhm. Yeah, so personally, I don't necessarily do a different race day breakfast. I eat oatmeal nearly every single day, whether it's a rest day or whether I have to do Unbound that day. My breakfast doesn't really change, and the reason why I kind of like that is because I don't know. Sometimes I think that people try to do something special for race day, and their body isn't used to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said for doing things that your body is used to on race day, and not trying new things on race day. Um, and I do oatmeal with peanut butter, berries, fruit. Um, I would say like a pretty typical cyclist breakfast before a race. Maybe a little bit more fibrous than some people. I know some people try to avoid fiber before a race. I have a pretty high fiber diet as it is, so lots of fiber doesn't necessarily mess me up, or sit in my stomach that long because my gut is used to that amount of fiber. But if your gut is not used to that amount of fiber, you might want to do lower fiber and do
Are you
white rice or
doing
something.
more volume? Like I know some guys will wake up earlier and they'll have the first breakfast and then rest a bit and then
Mm.
digest, and they'll almost have like, the second breakfast of the day. And we're talking get up at 3:30 a.m.,
Mm-hmm.
and then digest and have some more at 4:15.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, any kind of weird tendencies around that, or just more volume at all?
Not necessarily. Not
Yeah.
necessarily. I have one big bowl of oatmeal. I don't, and it's not necessarily more than I would typically have. I don't really want to be full on the starting line.
Yeah.
I think the perfect feeling to have on the starting line is that you are not you don't want to be hungry. So not hungry, not full, just satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Do you take anything on the start line? Any like gel or anything 5 minutes before the
yeah,
start?
I'll probably take a gel like with a minute to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
And,
think it's important to do the gel very close to the start as opposed to a gel say 45 minutes before the start. And the reason I say that is because you don't necessarily want to have a blood glucose spike and then dip.
mm-hmm.
If the dip is right when the race is starting, that's not great.
Yeah. Okay. So the race kicks off. What's the first hour nutrition plan look like?
Every hour is actually the same for me.
All right.
The first hour should probably look pretty similar to the last hour, and I just try to get in, I'd say 90 to 120 grams of carbs an hour. I'm not one of these riders that go really overboard with the grams of carbs per hour. I heard rumors that Cameron Jones, the rider that won Unbound, did 200 grams an hour. Of course, he's a very big rider, but I
He's
don't
about
go that high.
185 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So 90 to 120 grams of carbs an hour, and that is coming in the form of gels and drink mix.
All right.
I don't do any solid food, which I know for some people is a little bit scary not to do solid food for a race that long. And I used to do solid food, but I have switched to just gels and drink mix, and that's what I also recommend to amateur athletes that I coach. And I actually think that is the easiest on your digestive system when you're in a hard race.
So is there a schedule, every 20 minutes or something, a gel, or how do you stay on track?
Yeah, so the amount that you're drinking throughout the race will change because the race is getting hotter and you're getting more dehydrated later into the day. So at the beginning of the race, you might not be drinking a full bottle an hour, but then by the end of the race, you might actually be drinking more than a bottle an hour. So I try to have
Hmm.
90 grams of carbs in my bottles, but at the beginning of the race, I might not be drinking a full bottle. And then at the end of the race, I might actually be drinking more than a full bottle. So what I try to do is uh, look at how much fluid I'm drinking per hour and then adjust that accordingly with the amount of gels that I'm consuming. So if a gel has, 30 grams of carbs in it and I consume 60 grams of carbs from my bottle, which I didn't finish because my bottle has got 90 grams, but I didn't finish the whole thing. So I consumed roughly
Yep.
60 grams. Then I'll take a gel so I can get it up to 90. But then by the end of the race, if I'm consuming more than a bottle an hour, I'm like, well, okay, I don't need more gels because I'm getting my full 90. Um, so there's a little bit of mid race calculations going on,
Yeah.
depending on how much fluid I'm taking in.
Do you ever take in caffeine?
Yeah, I'll do. I don't do. I know this is sacrilege as a cyclist saying this because cyclists love their coffee, right? But I'm not much of a coffee drinker, and I don't consume caffeine if it's not race day. I will only do caffeine on high intensity days and race days just
Okay.
to make the most out of the caffeine. And
Yeah.
I don't go overboard with the caffeine on race day. I probably do 100 milligrams of caffeine every 2 or 3 hours. So for a
Yeah.
race like Unbound, that actually does end up being quite a bit of caffeine, but that's just because it's a long race.
Yeah. Um, what about like incorporating that strategy into training? Is every day the same, or are some days you're increasing you mentioned 90 to 120 grams an hour. Are you doing that every day in training or just certain rides?
I would say on high intensity days and long rides. If
Okay.
it's a short, easy ride, I will not be doing 90 grams of carbs an hour for that. But if it's a long day or a hard day, I'll practice that in training. And it's important to practice it in training because you train your gut to be able to handle that. If you're doing
Yeah.
90 grams an hour for the first time ever on race day, you're probably going to run into gut issues.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So continuing with nutrition, we have aid stations, and I
Mhm.
saw Ted King said when he first won Unbound, he won it twice. He said he told his crew, "I don't plan to be in the aid station that long," which meant not more than a couple minutes.
Mhm.
That is no longer the case. I mean, that's another
Mhm.
reason why times are coming down. I take it you don't stop as you come through like an Unbound aid station.
I put a foot down because
Okay.
I carry more fluid with me than most riders. Some riders are not stopping; they're taking a musette bag with bottles and nutrition, and that's it.
Yep.
Um, I put a foot down and just because I've got 4 bottles to swap on my frame, I've got a bladder to swap in my jersey, and then I'll take a soft flask that I put down the front of my
Wait, you said
jersey.
4 bottles on your frame?
Yeah. So there's only
Walk us through that.
okay. So there's only two aid stations in Unbound over the course of 200 miles. So it's not a lot.
Yeah.
So it's not like you can just grab a bottle and you're good. You're not good if you grab one
Yeah.
bottle. You're very much not good. You need a lot of fluid between these aid stations, and I think a lot of times people who are doing Unbound for the first time, they don't necessarily realize that because they're used to getting 2 bottles at an aid station and they're fine, and it's really not the case at Unbound. Um, and I'll take more fluid than I actually plan on drinking because the excess fluid I'll dump on myself for heat management purposes. But yeah, last year I did 4 650 milliliter bottles on my frame, and then I had a 3 liter bladder, not a 2 liter bladder, which is in most packs, a 3 liter bladder down the back of my jersey, and then I had another 600 milliliter flask down the front of my jersey. So that's a lot. I can't do the math here,
Yep.
how many liters that
Yeah.
is, but that's a lot of fluid, and it's more fluid than I was actually planning on drinking. Mostly just the bladder in the back was for drinking, and then the 4 bottles were filled with plain water, and I just dumped that on myself throughout the day to keep myself cool.
And the 4 bottles, where are they placed? I mean, the 2 primary bottle
Mm-hmm.
cages, and where are you doing the other 2?
Yeah, my felt breed actually has 4 bottle cages. So
Oh,
there's
wow.
there's 2 bottle cages on the top of the down tube. There's 1 bottle cage on the bottom of the down tube, and then there's a bottle cage on the seat tube. So you can do 4.
Wow, awesome. So you just have one person in the aid station kind of handing stuff up to you?
I think we had 3 last year, which
All
3
right.
seems like a lot, but the more people you have, the quicker you can get it done. And you need to be in and out of the aid station. If you're going to stop, you need to only have your foot down for, I'd say, less than 15 seconds. If it's much longer
Yeah.
than that, you're probably going to lose the group.
Yeah. I was in the 100 and I was wondering, I'm maybe in like a group coming for 50th place. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering, are we going to stop? Like, this is kind of all new to me, you know? So I just got it on the back of the group to see what was going to occur. Every single one of them, like they took off their vest, threw it, grabbed another vest on, grabbed another musette. So
Mm-hmm.
they basically had like whatever equivalent of 3 or 4 bottles, right? Uh, and I was like, oh my Lord, nobody in my group. And we're in the 100 going for like 50th place. Nobody stopped. So yeah, it gives you perspective. I'm sure a few years ago, everybody was stopping, and that was new to me. Are you oiling chain? Is anybody taking care of any of your gear? You know, when you
Mm-hmm.
stop for 15 seconds in aid station?
I think at this point, I don't know if there's enough time to lube a chain. There used to be enough time to lube a chain. I think at this point, if you're lubing a chain, it's too long. I personally use uh, Silka hot wax, and I'll use their endurance chip. And I think the endurance chip under normal unbound conditions, so not horrendously muddy, Silka's endurance chip should last nearly the entire unbound without a
Nice.
relube.
Yeah.
So I would recommend finding a solution like that, like Silka's endurance chip, that will last the entire race if you want to get in and out of the aid stations as quick as possible. Or just carry a small little bottle in your back pocket and try to lube while you're riding.
Yeah. Did you saw the 2 off the front were lubing each other's chains?
I did see that. Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty Spirit of Gravel. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, they were depending on each other to get to the finish line. So,
yeah.
the other guy's chain being efficient mattered. I think it was Simone or Simon giving the lube to Cameron Jones. I mean, he realized that Cameron Jones' drivetrain being efficient was going to help him get to the finish
Yeah.
line without getting caught, which is cool.
Yeah. I saw a hack. It was in Instagram. I saw it today, and one guy had like a sealant, like syringe,
Mm-hmm.
filled with lube, chain lube,
Mm-hmm.
and it was
Mm-hmm.
zip tied to his down tube with a tube down to his chain, so he could reach back and like put little amounts of
Mm-hmm.
lube like on his bike, on his chain throughout the race. I was like, oh my Lord, wow, are we going to see those commercialized?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the craziest hack I saw last week.
You know where I saw that for the first time? Actually, that's not a new thing to
Okay.
Unbound. I saw that nearly 10 years ago at La Ruta. La
Oh,
Ruta
yeah,
being a stage race in Costa Rica, horrendously muddy
yeah.
conditions. A lot of the riders in La Ruta had that exact same thing 10 years ago,
Wow.
so that they could lube their bike while they were racing.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, do you put anything in the aid station extras? Like you need the extra battery, the uh, I don't know, head unit,
Mm-hmm.
any kind of weird extras in case you might need along the way.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to have a head unit in there because the course is not marked. So if your head unit
Yeah,
dies, it's good to have another one at the aid station. It's probably good to have extra flat fixing equipment in case you get a flat, pick up some more. Probably good to have a tube in there if you have had multiple flats by the time you get to the aid station. Probably a good idea to pick up a tube.
yeah,
Spare wheels in the aid station, probably spare nutrition if you feel like what you have on board is not enough. Um, you could go full World Cup cross country mode and have like nearly a spare bike without the frame in the pits, but I don't know. Maybe we'll see that happen. You see that in World Cup cross country where they basically have every single part for the bike minus
Yeah.
the frame, because in World
Yeah.
Cup cross country, you can't switch bikes. You have to finish on the same frame, but you can switch out every other part of the bike.
Right.
I don't think we're quite seeing that yet at Unbound, because Unbound has the same rules, got to finish on the same bike.
Oh.
But I,
Do you have to finish on the same wheel set?
you don't. No, it's
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think it's just same frame. So you could switch
Yeah.
the wheels at the aid station.
True. Well,
Um,
Keegan did that with his teammate.
mhm.
Yeah. No, I mean, for age groupers that are spending a couple minutes or more in the aid, like I definitely saw people like getting their entire bike washed,
Mhm.
brand new lube. It was like brand new as they exited the aid, and that's got to feel just amazing.
Mhm.
So certainly, I'd be considering that. If you're gonna hang out for a few minutes in the aid station. So if we go to strategy now, this is where it really is very different between your race and the majority, 95% of folks out there. Talk us through, I mean, you're racing the strategy, but then how would you go about advising an athlete doing Unbound for the first time, for example? What are kind of targets, or how would you help them pace their first Unbound?
Yeah. No, the advice for these two hypothetical athletes is definitely very different. Um, I think for a pro who's trying to get a top 10 podium, win the race, then it seems to me that Unbound has become a race that actually suits a breakaway specialist. I mean, we saw a breakaway succeed this year and last year in the men's race, and a breakaway succeed this year in the women's race.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that obviously that probably won't always be the case, but I think more and more it's becoming a race where you got to really keep your head on a swivel and look at these riders going up the road and assess whether or not that is a move that you want to follow or not follow. I think if you're kind of playing defensively and just saying, I'll just sit in the front group and see what happens. I mean, that's probably the safest way to play the race. And, you'll probably get to the finish line with the most energy that way. And that could certainly work out for you. But it seems like if you're looking for the top step or a top three, you got to be looking at these moves going up the road and thinking, okay, I don't want to follow that one because I don't think there's enough strong riders. Oh, let me follow that one. Like, I know those two riders going up the road are strong and can go all day.
Right. I
So,
mean, you have all these Europeans and faces you don't even hardly know. You have all these
mhm,
wild cards,
mhm,
so that's a little even more difficult. Hence, like the guys that went off the front this year,
yeah.
um, you just don't always know who those guys are going up the front. So it's a little, it's just I guess a bet you take.
Yeah. I mean, it's like become like road racing now. Road racing is very tactical, and you got to play these games with yourself. What's a good move to follow? What's not a good move to follow? Unbound has become that in the pro race.
Yeah.
As far as the amateur strategy goes, I think the biggest mistake that I see, and I've looked at a lot of power files from a lot of long gravel races, is that you see the power. The power is very high in the first hour. People are going too hard, and then it steadily drops throughout the race. You almost never see somebody negative split their power, or even
Right.
equally split their power from the first half to the second half. People are usually going too hard in the first hour and then doing damage control.
Yeah.
Which there are plenty of races where I think that's warranted because you want to get with a fast group that you can draft with. These are not solo time trials, so you don't necessarily want to evenly pace the race as if it was a time trial. You do want to get in a fast group and work with that group for the remainder of the day, but you also don't want to go too hard so that you blow up. I mean, it's a very long race, and it's very easy to blow up when the race is that long. So it's kind of a, you know, I it would depend on, I would say, your fitness level. I think the lower your fitness level is, the more that you need to take pacing into account over getting with a fast group. The higher your fitness level is, I think you can play this game of trying to get with a fast group, despite the fact that you're a little bit over your optimal pace.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in a way, I find leveraging heart rate is very valuable
Mm-hmm.
in a race like this because power is all over the place. You're not going to look at your head unit and be like, "Oh Lord, I just hit 600 watts." And like, yeah, you're hitting 500 watts like all the time for like
Mm-hmm.
5 seconds, and then you coast and 5 seconds, and like it's just all over the place. So it's tough to like, unless you're on a smooth, nice road by yourself. Yeah, look at your head unit and peg it where you want to hold the power. But heart rate, that's where it comes into play. In the first 90 minutes or so, I was looking at heart rate and I'm like, oh man, I'm like at or above threshold here. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
not sustainable. There's a good reminder of like, okay, I need to like be careful, like tone it back. But having said that, like I know my capabilities for a 5 hour race, and I'm like, I can do a bunch of zone 4,
Mm-hmm.
for a 5 hour race. So I didn't keep it all in zone 2, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But if you are doing a 14 hour, Unbound 200, I mean, that's going to be primarily the zone 2 zone, right?
Yeah, it'll be a combination of zone 2 and zone 3. I think
Yeah.
for most people it'll be mostly zone 2, but you can hit zone 3 a little bit in a 14-hour effort.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that, if you're doing a 14-hour Unbound 200 and you're seeing threshold heart rate numbers in the
Yeah.
first hour, you're making a mistake. You're going too
Yeah.
hard. Um, and it's not an uncommon mistake. In fact, it's an extremely common mistake, but it's you should probably back it off a little bit. And I actually look at two things. I do look at heart rate. I think heart rate's super valuable. I completely agree with that. And then I also will have normalized power on my screen and just normalized power for the whole race. And
Yeah.
I have a very good idea personally what normalized power is sustainable for certain duration
Right.
races.
Yeah.
And if you're an amateur athlete, as you do more of these races, you can have an idea of what is sustainable for you. If you've done multiple unbounds or if you've done other gravel races, you think, okay, I did this normalized power for this race, I did this normalized power for that race. And if your normalized power is well above what you know is sustainable for the entire race, that's also a sign that maybe you should back it down. If your
Yeah.
normalized power, this doesn't usually happen, but if your normalized power is lower than what you know is sustainable, you could probably speed up a little bit.
No, that's a great, great tip. Like having the overall normalized power for the day, like
Mm-hmm.
on one of your screens, that's really good advice. So how about training?
Mm-hmm.
If someone's coming from triathlon, what are the most important aspects to focus on in training, preparing for 100+ mile,
Sure.
gravel race?
Sure. Yeah. This is another one of those where it might be the answer for the pros might be a little bit different than the answer for the amateurs. The I feel like it's almost become a meme now, talking about the Unbound block for the pros. The pros bragging about what they did in their Unbound block on social media. And if it's not on Strava or if it's not on Instagram, did it even happen? um,
It's in
but
TrainingPeaks though, so it happened.
yeah, right. But no one. But if it's on Training Peaks, other people don't know about it. Part of doing the
I know.
Unbound block is that people know that you did it. um, yeah. So the Unbound block is kind of a thing that's become super popular amongst people who are taking Unbound seriously. I would say not even pros. I mean, even amateurs are kind of adopting this Unbound block mentality. And it's just a block of very high volume done probably a month out before the race. Some riders do a 2 week block, some riders do a 3 week block, but it's substantially higher volume than you would normally do. We've seen riders go above 40 hours in a week for this
Yeah.
block. And for other riders, substantially higher volume might mean 30 hours. It might mean 25. It might mean 15. If you normally ride 6 hours a week, a 15-hour a week is crazy high volume for you. So it's
Yeah.
all relative to your current fitness level and your current level of riding. But I actually think there's a lot to to the Unbound Block. And, there's a fair bit of research on block periodization. Block periodization just meaning that you're blocking your training together as opposed to spreading it out more evenly. Most of the research on block periodization is done using block periodization with intensity. So for those that aren't familiar, block periodization with intensity, let's just say you normally do 2 intensity sessions in a week, every week. So block periodization with intensity would mean that instead of doing 2 sessions per week, you've got 1 week where you do 5 or 6 intensity sessions. So it's a very high stress week. Right. And then after that, you might just do 1 session per week. So less intensity than you would normally do. So you've blocked all this training stress together. So by the end of this training month, you've actually done the same number of intensity days for the whole month. You just blocked it all together in the first week as opposed to spreading it out. And there is research to show that blocking it together in the first week actually led to greater fitness gains than spreading it out more evenly. And I think that same principle could also apply to volume as well. And that's kind of what we're seeing riders doing with this Unbound block, is they're blocking this volume together and then kind of taking an extended taper into Unbound.
So do you have any intensity at all within that volume block?
I think it really depends on your fitness level. If it's your first time ever doing this volume of riding, and again, the volume of riding really depends on what, it's relative to your current volume. So if you're a 6-hour per week rider right now, don't go out and do 30 hours. I would say maybe start at 15. That 15 hours will be a lot for you if you do 6 hours per week. It's relative to the amount that you typically ride. And if it's your first time, I would say keep the intensity pretty minimal, just because you want to see how your body reacts. And I think the more experience you get with it, and you see how your body recovers afterwards, and if your body recovers well, you can experiment with adding more intensity to your volume block. For me personally, this year I've done numerous volume blocks, not just for Unbound, but for other races, and I felt comfortable enough that I did 2 intensity sessions per week for 3 weeks during this high volume block. And these intensity days were more or less normal intensity days, despite the fact that I was doing so much higher volume than I normally do.
Yeah. And in that volume, are you targeting, the whole hype now is zone 2. Are you targeting like this zone 2 kind of area for the volume?
Most of it will be zone 2. Yeah. You could make an argument that you want to be in the upper end of zone 2 because that's specific to race day. I would say that if you're doing a 14-hour Unbound, you're probably going to be doing a lot of upper zone 2. But then again, you're doing a lot of volume, and spending that much time in upper zone 2 is quite taxing. So I might have some days where I go to the upper end of zone 2, but there's probably plenty of days that are just mid zone 2 as well.
Yeah. Anything else? Like, people have been talking a lot about heat adaptation. It was certainly hot. It got to 90 degrees at Unbound this year. There's plenty of other hot races, even for cold races. There's, it's shown that heat training can help you even in colder days. So do you do any kind of sauna or active heat training?
Yeah, I think heat training is important for a race like Unbound. And I think it's a performance enhancer. As you said, it's a performance enhancer, even if you're not doing a hot race. And there's different ways to go about it, and it doesn't necessarily need to be super complicated. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be, you don't need to do heat training for months. I know that there are pro riders doing heat training in the middle of January now, which, is fine. But the research actually shows that you can become heat acclimated in a week. You don't necessarily need months of heat training to get ready for Unbound. It can happen pretty quickly. You can do that by actually just riding in hot temperatures. You could do it by having sauna sessions immediately after your ride. You could do it by wearing, a sweatsuit on the trainer with no fan on you. I recently looked at a study comparing those 3 different methods, and they found no difference between any of them. They were all
Yeah.
effective. So
Yeah.
there's multiple ways to do the heat training, and you can decide which one works best for your style of training and go with that one. I do think that you should also keep in mind, though, that heat training is a form of stress on your body, and they've even the reason why this research is actually fresh on my mind is because I'm in the middle of doing research for a video on heat acclimation. There was a study that I looked at just recently where they had a group do heat training and high intensity, and then they had a group do heat training and low intensity, and then they had a control group that did low intensity and no heat training. And they actually found that the group that did heat training and low intensity fared better because it seemed that the group that did heat training and high intensity was a little bit too stressed. It
Right.
was a little bit too much stress for their system. They weren't recovering well.
Yeah. Definitely. It's an additional stressor. Do you have any protocols? Are you doing the sauna? Are you doing it over, indoor on the
Mhm.
trainer, extra layers, no fan? Like, what's your go-to heat training protocol?
I have a sauna, and the best way to do the sauna is to do it immediately after a ride.
Mm,
So if you just go out on your normal ride and then jump straight in the sauna, that's better
nice.
than doing the sauna hours later that day.
Yeah.
Um, so that's personally what I do. But like I said, you don't have to go down that route. I mean, if where you another way to go about it is if it is the summer and it's hot enough outside and you can choose what time of day you want to ride. I'll personally ride at 3 in the afternoon when it's 95 degrees, just to get the heat acclimation. I could ride at 8 in the morning when it's 70 degrees and it'd be much more comfortable, but I
Right.
don't do that. I wait until it's really hot outside and then I ride. So that's
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
another way to go about it.
Yeah. That's a whole lot of advice for folks out there listening. What does gravel look like 10 years from now? What does gravel racing look like down the
Yeah,
road?
that's a good question. I mean, I think that it does start to look more like road racing. I think one of the untapped things right now is team tactics, at least in the pro
Yeah.
field. There are teams, but the teams are usually teams of 2 or teams of 3, and it's questionable how much tactics are coming into play. There's a little bit of tactics going on, but it's not nearly to the same degree as road racing. And I think that we could probably see that change in professional gravel racing where there might be bigger gravel teams and they might actually have a team plan before the race. Like, you need to be on the front here driving the pace. And then if a rider goes up the road, we send a rider up the road and that rider's not actually supposed to make it to the finish. They're supposed to get caught so we don't have to do work. All the typical tactics that you see in road racing, those aren't quite there in gravel yet, and I think we could easily see them come to gravel in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I could definitely see more team organization as more money flows into the sport, teams get
Mm-hmm.
more organized, more resources coming in for sure. I can see that. And then on the equipment side, suspension, right?
Yeah, I think we will see more suspension come into the sport. It's I would like to see more aero suspension because I think the current
Yeah,
suspension offerings they lean a little bit more on the mountain bike side. Like they look
right.
like trimmed down mountain bike forks, like
Yeah,
a shrunken mountain bike fork. And I think what we need to see is more of a road gravel style fork that has suspension. I think that's the
yeah,
right way to go about it because then you've got the aerodynamics and you've got the suspension. I think the biggest issue right now is that you are losing aero watts when you put the suspension fork on for most suspension forks, not
yeah.
but if you could get the best of both worlds and you could be improving your aerodynamics and have that suspension, I think that's the way to go.
Awesome. Thanks, Dylan. And, hopefully you start to heal up quickly here and we see you back on the road in the next couple months, hopefully. But thanks for taking the time with us today and sharing all your wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. This was fun. I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Training Peaks Coachcast. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources.